So let's talk about the cardiovascular system and what we call circulation. In fact, this used to be called the circulatory system. If you're old enough to remember that, that's how it used to be referred to. The system here structurally is pretty simple. I've mentioned these parts several times now, but there's obviously the heart. We need to understand the heart. There are the blood vessels, the tubes, the highways for the human body, and then there's the blood. So you can make it just as simple as that. These are going to be the foundation for you understanding physiology. When you get to physiology, you're going to spend a lot of time on the cardiovascular system because it's so critical to health. You're going to understand how the heart creates blood pressure and how that blood pressure is modified so that you always have the right amount of blood pressure. Okay? So structurally, this is pretty straightforward. And we're going to take each of the elements and talk about it. For example, the big topic this week will be the heart. Next week, we'll look at blood and blood vessels. Okay? We want to understand that the same blood, that you have one quantity of blood, and that blood moves around over and over and over again through you. Blood circulates out of the heart, okay, through blood vessels we call arteries, and that's our main definition for an artery, is a blood vessel leading away from the heart. Those arteries get smaller and smaller and smaller, and they finally lead to the tissues of the human body. This is how the deliveries are made. And then from that spot, kind of like this, remember this picture from the maintenance introduction, right? If you have a great big giant freeway, it branches and branches and branches until you've got little blood vessels everywhere. Like the branches of a tree going from the trunk out to the leaves. The arteries, as they get smaller and smaller and smaller, they finally become so tiny, okay, that they're capable of allowing things to pass through the walls. The big blood vessels do not have walls that are small enough for materials to pass through. Only at these little tiny blood vessels that we call capillaries will raw materials or waste products be able to move from the cardiovascular system to the cells or vice versa. If this blood here was carrying food, nutrients, as it passes through here, the nutrients would leave and nourish the cells. Any waste products that the cells were producing could cross into the blood vessels. But this can only happen at these tiny, tiny little blood vessels called capillaries. Here's a picture of a capillary. Capillaries are so small that blood cells, you can see red blood cells here, blood cells start lining up single file to go through them. Here's a little bit larger artery right here, but these little tiny ones where you see the single cells in them, those are the capillaries. How small is a capillary? Really small. Here's a good way to visualize with your mind, doing a little imagination thing with me, if you will. Can you make a cube with your mind? Can you picture a cube? Okay. Now, what I need you to do is make that cube so small that its dimensions are the thickness of a dime. You know how thin a dime is? It's about 1 millimeter in thickness here. So shrink your little box down till it becomes this tiny little box whose dimensions are just the thickness of a dime. Got that now? See how small that is? Now let's put some blood in that. The blood in that is a cubic millimeter of blood, or what we call a milliliter. Now, in that blood are these red blood cells. How many red blood cells are there in that little tiny box? Thousands? Hundreds? 5 million. 5 million red blood cells in that little tiny box you just made. That's how small the red blood cells are. Now, how small does the tube have to be that all those little blood cells have to line up single file to get through it? That's a capillary. That is a tube with walls so thin that water and dissolved materials can pass through those walls very easily. Okay? That is your picture of a capillary. Okay? Now, extrapolate that. I've got all these cells in my human body. Every one of these cells, 70 trillion cells, has to live near a capillary, doesn't it? This is the only place where the walls are so thin that materials can be delivered. Okay? How many blood vessels is that? If you've got 70 trillion cells and you've got a little road, now you don't have as many roads as you have houses, right? If you've got a little residential street with all sorts of people's houses on it, you got more houses than streets. But still, if there's 70 trillion cells, you're going to have hundreds of billions of capillaries. There's going to be a capillary everywhere. If there's a living cell, there's got to be a capillary nearby. If you could take all the arteries and all the veins and all the capillaries out of your body and put them end to end, it's estimated that it would go around the earth twice at the equator. That's about 50,000 miles of tubes in your human body. How do you get that many tubes in you? Well, they just have to be very, very, very small, don't they? So more than anything, I want you to see that capillaries are where the action is. Okay? Right? Transportation without being able to deliver anything would be useless. If you're just running blood around your body over and over again, what's the big deal? There's got to be a place where things can get into the bloodstream and get out of the bloodstream. And that is the capillaries. Okay? All the entrances and all the exits from the cardiovascular system are at the capillary level. Everything else is just a major highway. It's like saying, does somebody put their house on the freeway? You have a driveway onto the freeway from your... No. Same thing in your human body. Cells don't live next to freeways. Okay? They live on these little tiny residential streets that we call capillaries. So arteries are just the directing tubes to get blood to the capillaries. Okay? Then, once the blood is passed through a capillary, once it's done its exchange thing with nutrients, waste products, gases, whatever, then veins carry the blood back to the heart. And that same blood is now going to be pumped over and over again. This is a different way of thinking. For a couple hundred years now, we've known that blood circulates. Before that time, people were not real sure about that. It's interesting. If you go back hundreds of years, the experience of most people with materials in their world is that things get used up. What if I make a fire and I put wood in the fire? What happens to the wood? Do I get to use it over again? No, it's burned up and it's gone. What happens to food? If I put food in and it passes through my body, can I use it all over again? No, it's used up, right? So wouldn't it make sense to people that lived long ago that blood was made by your human body and then used up in your human body? It kind of made sense. They knew blood was pumped. They knew blood was moving through your human body. But because they couldn't see the capillaries, all you could see was the tubes start in one place and seem to end at the other. They would just get so small they would disappear. There was no sense that the arteries were connected to the veins through the capillaries. And so most people long ago thought that your liver, great big giant organ, was producing blood. That blood was sucked up through a big tube to your heart. And then your heart was then pumping that blood out to be used up by all of your body tissues. So you're constantly making blood. It wasn't until the microscope where we could see the tiny little capillaries and see that the arteries were connected back to the veins that we understood that the same blood moves through us again and again and again. That was the understanding of what we called circulation. The same blood circulates over and over again. Now, what you see here is what we're going to call a circuit. A circuit of blood. When we talk about a circuit within the cardiovascular system, we're talking about moving blood from the heart out through arteries, out through capillaries, back through veins, and back to the heart. Now, what I'm going to do with you here in this lecture is I'm going to move you slowly to a more complicated understanding of the cardiovascular system. We need to start with this concept of a circuit. Then we're going to make things a little more difficult as we go along. So here's where things get a little more complicated. We understand that blood goes out through a circuit. The heart is actually not a single pump. The heart is actually two pumps fused into a single organ. So I've got a single organ I call the heart, but when I look at it closely, it's two separate pumps within the heart. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's first define these two. This is very simple. We're just going to say this is the right side of the heart, or the right side pump, and that this is the left side pump. And again, I've talked to you before, left and right starts becoming very, very important here. Left and right is going to be real important in the practical exam next week. Okay, when we're talking about left side and right side things, like a right subclavian artery versus a left subclavian artery. Okay, got to be able to label those properly. But here's the heart, two pumps fused together, a right side pump and a left side pump. Now, if there are two pumps, guess how many circuits there are? What do you think? Right, two circuits, two pumps, and two circuits actually within my human body. So I've got you up to speed on what a circuit is. Now I think you can see there are two. Let's show you how these circuits work, okay? Because they're not isolated from one another. One circuit goes from the right side pump and finishes at the left side pump. Okay, so the right side pump is pumping blood over to the left. Guess where the left side pump is then pumping? Yeah, okay. And then the left side pump now is going to pump over to the right side of the heart. So each pump is ultimately pumping to the opposite pump. Okay? How are we doing? Is this making sense? Able to follow this now? If you're going to follow circulation, you're going to have to know how to name things here, but you're also going to have to be able to follow circulation. If blood is in one place in this whole picture, you've got to be able to say, where is it going next? Okay? A full circulation visits both sides of the heart and both circuits. And you follow that? Let's start a drop of blood here on the right side of the heart. Okay? It's going to be pumped out of the right side through a circuit that leads back to the left side. The left side is then going to pump it through the second circuit here, which leads finally back to the right side. I'm back where I began, aren't I? Then it goes back out the right side and back to the left and out the left and back to the right, over and over and over again. Yeah, the actual destination, we're going to talk about the destinations for each of these. But yeah, each one of these circuits is arteries, capillaries, and veins, isn't it? Right? When we say a circuit, we think arteries, capillaries, veins, and back to the heart. It's just that one side of the heart, when it goes through its circuit, comes to the left, and the other comes to the... Okay. So, why two pumps? Okay, that's where we're at right here. Why two pumps and two circuits? Okay, and it's really because of one of the materials that we are delivering. When you talk about making deliveries here, water is ever present throughout the system, in your cells, in your bloodstream. Water is delivered constantly. No big deal. Food. Okay? Do your cells need food every single second? Not every single second, right? Do I need to eat constantly? No. Food is one of those things that can be supplied. I can go for weeks without food if I had to. Wouldn't be pleasant, but I could do it. There is one substance, though, that I have to have supplied moment by moment. Right? Moment by moment. What is that? Right. Oxygen. Right? Oxygen must be supplied to every cell minute by minute. Moment by moment. Interrupt oxygen supply and you die. And the cells that are most sensitive for that are your nervous system. Your brain is most sensitive to that. And since you live in your brain, this is you. Sometimes the brain can die and the rest of the body goes right on doing its thing. Lights are on, but nobody's home. So, when you understand how the supply of oxygen fits here, this all begins to make sense. Two pumps and two circuits. And here's how that works. One of these circuits, the only reason for the circuit, it's to send the blood to the lungs to pick up oxygen. Now that's the right side pump here. The right side pump, its only task is to pump blood out to the lungs to receive oxygen. That's how important it is, right? Half of my heart is dedicated to getting oxygen. Food, we can send some of the blood to the digestive system. We can get some food from the digestive system. We can deliver that next week. No big deal, right? But moment by moment oxygen. So half of my heart is dedicated to sending blood to the lungs. Okay? That's going to pick up oxygen. Now that oxygenated blood now is returning to the left-hand side, isn't it? Now where do you suppose the left-hand side of the heart is pumping its blood to? The where? The rest of the human body, right? The entire rest of my human body. This is what is now delivering the oxygen, right? So I've got one circuit and one half of the heart dedicated to picking up the oxygen, and then the other half of my heart is dedicated to delivering that oxygen. That makes sense? When you see the cardiovascular system, when you see its two circuits and the two sides of the heart in light of the picking up and delivery of oxygen, it all begins to make sense. Now we'll put more and more detail to this as we go along. Okay? This circuit from the right side of the heart out and back to the left is going to be called the pulmonary circuit. Pulmonary is the word we always use with lungs. Pulmonary circuit. The circuit from the left side that goes through the entire human body is what we're going to call the systemic circuit. And you will hear people talking about, in medical situations, you'll hear them talking about systemic circulation or pulmonary circulation. And when they do, you want to immediately be able to think of the structure of the heart and its blood vessels and know where you are within the entire circulating system. Pulmonary circuit and a systemic circuit. Now, right away, you've got to be thinking the two pumps in the heart must not be totally equal, right? This left side is pumping through how many systems in the human body? 10 out of 11, right? If I say, well, there are 11 organ systems in my human body, the left side is pumping to 10 of them. my bones, my muscles, my skin, my digestive system, my urinary system, my nervous system, my endocrine system, my reproductive system. How many systems is the pulmonary circuit pumping to? Just one, right? If you were asked which one of the two sides of the heart, which one of those pumps must be bigger and stronger, which one would it be? It's got to be the left, right? This is pumping out to your fingertips, to the top of your head, out to your feet. Where's the right side pumping to? It's like next door, right? Just pumping over and back. It's like walking next door to visit your neighbor versus walking 10 miles to visit a friend downtown somewhere. Okay? A lot more work to get the blood out to the entire human body than it is to get it next door. But all of this is balanced. This is a little bit smaller pump than this. You're going to see that in the heart. I think it's going to be very interesting for you to dissect the heart and look at its muscle, and look at its arrangement, look at its chambers. You're going to see what this looks like firsthand. Okay? So, put the entire circuit together now. Here's the pulmonary circuit from right side to left, right? The lung tissues are here. There's got to be tons of capillaries in the lungs, doesn't there? Right? And we're going to pump out through arteries to reach the lung tissues. This is where oxygen is going to be picked up, right? In the little capillaries. And then there are going to be veins that carry this oxygenated blood now back to the left side of the heart. So this is a circuit: arteries, capillaries, veins. The whole purpose here is to pick up oxygen. Okay, so that's the pulmonary circuit. How about this whole body circuit? How about the systemic circuit here? This is to the entire human body. Again, as you would expect, arteries, right? Leading out to the capillaries. This is where the oxygen is delivered. Now, many other things are delivered too, but oxygen is the one we're focusing on. And then veins. So 2 pumps and 2 circuits, pulmonary and systemic. Now, this picture is in your textbook. And if you understand what I just have been saying before, you should now be able to take sort of a real diagram here. Be aware when you look at this, this is right down here is going to represent moving from arteries to capillaries to veins. This represents all of the stuff in the lower part of your human body. This represents all of the tissues in the upper part of your human body. So this is very diagrammatic when you get out here. Okay, but let's see if we can follow this. Now you got to remember one thing here. When you see red here, red is not an artery. Red is oxygenated blood. Okay, when you see red in a circulatory picture, it's showing you where the blood is that has been enriched with oxygen. That makes sense? And likewise, blue is then what we call deoxygenated blood. Now, you should probably know that deoxygenated blood is not without oxygen. It's just got such a low level that there isn't enough oxygen in it that's usable. But it's clear here then where the oxygenation is, right? And we want to constantly come back to oxygenation here. Let's see if we can follow the blood flow now. This blue side of the heart is the right or the left? The right side of the heart, right? Remember, right and left. If this is, we assume this is a front picture. This is the right, this is the left. So the blue side here is the right. The red side over here is the left. The red side looks smaller, but don't be fooled. The red side is bigger. But the heart actually sits in the chest like this. And I'm turning my body so that the right shoulder of my body is facing you more, right? And so the right side of my body looks bigger, right? Because the left side of me is more hidden when I'm standing like this, isn't it? The heart is the same. They've tried to draw the heart in its anatomical position. So the left side is hidden. It's more around the back. Okay? But let's follow blood flow from the right-hand side. Pulmonary circuit comes from the right-hand side here. Now, let's follow it. Blood is going to flow up through this tube here. And this is blood that is returned from the human body without oxygen, isn't it? And doesn't that make sense that the right side is pumping deoxygenated blood, isn't it? Where is it pumping it to? Well, you follow it up here, and then this tube coming out of the heart always makes a T because you've got two lungs, right? So now the blood flows out through these two tubes, one to the right lung, one to the left lung, and now it's going to flow through capillaries. As the blood flows through the capillaries here, the oxygen is absorbed, the carbon dioxide is released, right? And now the blood flowing back from the lungs is flowing back, and you can see these tubes lead back to the left side of the heart, and now the blood is oxygenated, isn't it? So I've got oxygenated blood now collecting in the left side of the heart. And now what does the left side of the heart do? Right? The left side of the heart is now going to pump that blood up and out. And you see this big red tube here is coming out of the left side. I bet most of you could name this red tube, couldn't you? What's this big red tube that arches up like this and then runs down through the body? Come on, say it. It's the aorta, of course it is, right? And this tube going up here represents all of the upper part of the body. So this would represent the brachiocephalic and the common carotid and all of that, right? So now that blood is flowing up with oxygen to the tissues, right? And down here to the lower parts of the body. When that blood flows through the capillaries in all the rest of your body, the oxygen is delivered to the tissues. Carbon dioxide is picked up. And as you flow through the capillaries now, the blood is now going to flow back. We got it flowing out. Now the blood is going to flow back through these major veins, deoxygenated now, right? As we gave up the oxygen. And now that blood is flowing back to the right side of the heart. We're back where we started, aren't we? I bet you could even name these two big blue tubes here, right? What are they? What's this one up here? Yeah, that's the superior vena cava, and this one down here is the inferior vena cava. So they've done a number of the major tubes here to look somewhat like they do. You can see the heart with its two sides. Okay? So circulation here is pulmonary and systemic circuits have blood flowing through the lungs from the right side and through the body from the left side. If you're going to follow full circulation, you've got to be able to go through all of that. If I said blood is here, where is it going next? Could you tell me within this system? Right? There are pulmonary arteries, right? There are pulmonary capillaries, and don't look at that line because I put that line in wrong. That should be pointing over here to the capillaries in one of the two lungs. And there are pulmonary veins, and we use these designations. We say pulmonary arteries or pulmonary capillaries or pulmonary veins. There's systemic arteries, systemic capillaries, and systemic veins. Two circuits, two sides of the heart. Now we got to do one thing. This is a place where students often have a problem. I know some of you are getting restless. You may need to go to another class or something, but you need to hear this, okay? Because people get very, very confused here. Can you name this blood vessel right here? What is that? What? I just gave you 6 things. Is that a systemic artery, systemic vein, systemic capillary? Is that a pulmonary artery, pulmonary vein, pulmonary capillary? Which one is it? Pulmonary? Is it an artery or a vein? This is the pulmonary artery. Okay? You see how students get confused here, right? And it's partly my fault. Okay? Because I've told you, every time you see a red tube, it's an artery. Every time you see a blue tube, it's a vein. What it is in order to get things started with you, I've treated things very simply. Every artery or vein that you and I have studied in a cat or wherever has been a systemic artery or a systemic vein. And all systemic arteries are red and all systemic veins are blue, meaning that systemic arteries carry oxygenated blood and systemic veins carry deoxygenated blood. But when you move to the pulmonary circuit through the lungs, it's reversed, isn't it? The pulmonary arteries are carrying deoxygenated blood. They're colored blue. And the pulmonary veins are bringing oxygenated blood back to the heart. That's a vein, but it's red. If you don't understand this oxygen thing, okay, this is going to be very, very confusing. But once you get it, it works. You can't memorize this. You've got to look at it long enough that you get it. Once you get it, you can't unget it. Okay? But make sure that you understand this. Let's define an artery and a vein for you. Absolutely. An artery is a tube that carries blood away from the heart, period. And a vein is a blood vessel that brings blood back to the heart, period. If you use that definition, you'll always get it right. Okay? If you don't, you'll get this confused and it'll be much, much more difficult. Okay? So is everybody good there? Everybody understand? Okay, I think we can leave this right here. I might want to say, which blood vessel is this then? Right? If I was pointing here, you'd tell me that's a pulmonary vein. If it's in the pulmonary circuit, it's pulmonary something. If it's from the left side of the heart, it's a systemic something. Okay? Just keep all of that straight.